Hi, it's Matt, and I'm back here to talk a little bit more about coffee. Today we're going to be talking about oily coffee. Probably 5 years ago, I wrote a really brief blog post describing some of the common fallacies or misnomers about oily coffee, and it's turned out to be basically the most popular blog post we've ever written. And so I wanted to use this time this morning to talk through a little bit of what that blog post says and kind of expand on it a little bit. So when you think about oily coffee, you probably think about dark roasts, maybe coffee you get from your local coffee shop or from the grocery store. And a lot of times people associate that with a good dark roast coffee or even with an espresso bean. And frankly, that's a misconception. What I want to talk about today is what makes a coffee oily, a little bit what makes a dry coffee perhaps better, and then some of the problems with having oily coffees. What makes a coffee oily? Inside of the coffee is, without getting into all of the chemistry around it, there is a lot going on inside of the coffee. As you start to roast it, and we've talked about this in our coffee roasting videos, the coffee bean starts to crack and pop, and you start to let some CO2 out of the coffee, and as that hits oxygen and some of the other sugars inside the coffee, that actually oxidizes and creates an oil. And that oil comes out of the bean. As the bean continues to oxidize over a longer period of time, the coffee gets oily and oilier and oilier. And so if you roast it longer, you're going to see that second crack. You're going to see not just the exterior shell of the bean crack, but the interior shell of the bean crack. You're going to get a lot more sugars hitting that oxygen, and you're going to see a lot more oxygen and oil on the bean itself. That is an indicator that the coffee has probably been roasted to a darker level where the inside part of the shell has cracked and become oxidized. That's why you think of oily coffee with dark roast coffees. There's also a time element to that. The more time that the CO2 releases from the bean and it connects with oxygen, the more likely you're going to get oily coffee. And so you're going to see a lighter roast coffee might sit on the shelf for a month and start to get oily because of that oxidation process. So it doesn't always mean that it's a dark roast coffee. Sometimes a coffee can be oily just because it's been sitting on the shelf for a long time. How do you get dry coffee? Frankly, you just don't roast it that dark and you drink it super fresh. I think I'll talk about this in a later video, but we'll talk a little bit about the life of a coffee bean and how that CO2 is actually released from the coffee bean for up to 48 or 72 hours after roast. It's called the degassing period, where the coffee actually develops better flavors. As time goes on, you start to lose some of the flavors inside. They start to oxidize and some of the richness of the coffee goes away. I personally love coffee somewhere between that 72-hour period and really about 7 to 10 days after roast. If it starts going past 10 days, I feel like some of what makes that coffee great starts to go away. That doesn't mean you need to throw away your coffee every 10 days or you need to buy new coffee every 10 days. I get that call a lot. It's all up to our palates. You'll start to notice when the coffee starts tasting worse. That to you is when it's time for you to move on to the next coffee. But during that period of time, it's also going to oxidize and become oily. So you might buy coffee from Sagebrush, have it sit on your shelf for a couple of weeks, open it up and see that it's oil and be like, wait, Matt, you said these were dry beans. Well, that's the oxidation process. That's time going on and affecting the flavor of the beans. And so what makes oily coffee bad? Why are people avoiding it? There's a lot of super automatic coffee machines out there that in the first page of the instructions it says, do not use oily coffee with this maker. Why not? Frankly, because it's a mess. The oil on it is sticky. It ends up clogging your grinder. It could clog the super automatic. And some people don't like the flavor of it. It does change the flavor profile of the bean, and so some people don't like it. It kind of is bitter, and so that bitterness is some of what people try to avoid. When you're looking for fresh roasted coffee, you're not going to get as bitter of a flavor, and really that's just the lipids inside of the coffee oxidizing with the air, and over time that becomes bitter. And so you want to avoid that. Really, it's kind of hard to clean. Like when I have some old beans sitting around and see the oil sitting in the container we have, like, it doesn't just wipe out. It's harder to clean because it's not as great. And so people don't like oily coffee, and machines that you may not be able to submerge in water don't like oily coffee because it just makes it hard. It ends up clogging up the machine and makes the wear and tear of the machine last a lot shorter. When you're thinking about oily coffee, and you're thinking about what coffee you want to have, I generally try to avoid oily coffee. I think the oils are bitter. I think it means that it's not super fresh, or it was roasted a little bit darker than it probably needs to be and doesn't have some of that natural flavor in it. There is a segment of the coffee drinking world that loves that bitter, rich flavor. If that's what you like, go for it. Run at it. There's a lot of good oily coffees out there, but know that you're not getting fresh roasted coffee. I also want to talk a little bit about decaf. So most of our decafs are Swiss water decaf. The Swiss water process basically submerges the green bean in water. It has a chemical reaction to the water where it actually soaks the caffeine out of the water, and then they soak it back in. They remove the caffeine, soak it back in the water, and that becomes your Swiss water processed coffee. That reduces the strength of the outer shell of the bean. So when you roast a decaf coffee, you're not going to hear the cracks the way you do because the shell of the bean has kind of been soaked away. That also means that decaf coffees will tend to look darker and produce oil a lot faster than a regular coffee. You may get a decaf coffee from Sagebrush and say, wait a minute, you said this was a light roast and it looks dark, or how come this is oily? I thought it was supposed to be fresh. And I've had decaf coffees look oily before I can even get them in the bag, and we roasted them light because the outer shell of the bean itself is a lot more weak. So that reaction, the CO2 comes out faster, the lipids transfer with the oxygen, you get the oxidation faster, and you might see everything that takes 2 or 3 weeks to happen with a regular coffee bean happen in a week or in a day with the decaf coffee bean. And that's frankly why probably decafs don't always taste as good for as long, not because the bean itself isn't as good. We've had decaf coffees that we sold the regular coffee as well. The beans are great. Sometimes you just have to drink them faster. Keep that in mind as you're buying how much decaf you have. If you have a cup of coffee every night before bed, you might want to get, your normal amounts. But if you're looking to have 1 or 2 a week, you might want to get as little as you possibly can. I think that's it when it comes to oily coffee. If you have any questions, go ahead and comment down below, and I'd love to answer it. Like, subscribe, do all those great things. Keep informed on what I'm putting out there. I'm trying to post something every couple of weeks on our YouTube video, and I hope to even speed that up over time. Thanks a lot.